Another one of the hottest years on record.
We just covered this last night, but it was so amazing. I see it here on TikTok, and I just figured if you didn't catch the stream, here is the very, very best part.
How many times are we going to have another hottest year on record? How many times are we going to have an increase of carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere before we're finally like, okay.
I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because it depends. The scientific answer to that question depends precisely on the time frame over which.
The time frame. But I would love to ask Destiny what it would do to his narrative if next year we had a colder winter.
You evaluate the climate fluctuation, and that's actually an intractable scientific problem.
Mm-hmm.
So you might say, well, if you take the last 100 years, this variation looks pretty dismal. And I'd say, well, what if you took the last 150,000 years, or the last 10,000, or the last 10 million?
When in doubt, zoom out.
You can't specify the damn time frame of analysis.
The time frame is incredibly important. That would be like saying,
that's literally just what he said. The time frame is very important.
Look at your, let's say somebody developed cancer, they didn't realize it, and the person has lost, 40 or 50 pounds in the past 6 months, and I'm just like, you look very sickly. And you're like, okay, well, look at my weight fluctuation over the past 10 years. You say, well, that doesn't really matter. What matters is the fact.
Okay, but does that replicate what we're seeing with climate? We're seeing the patterns exactly as we would expect them to.
The time frame isn't important.
Well, but I'm saying
that it is important.
Yeah, but
I'm saying I don't know how to specify it.
Well, you would probably specify it with the beginning of the industrial age, right?
Why?
Because that's when carbon dioxide, which is a gas that's trapping more heat on the planet.
Why is that relevant to the time?
It's plant food.
Over which you compute the variability.
Yeah,
because it seems like as carbon dioxide has increased in the atmosphere, the surface temperatures have risen at a rate that is a departure from what we'd expect over 150,000 year cycles of temperature variations on the planet.
No, not with that time frame. That's just not the case.
Absolutely the case.
No, what do you mean? You just flipped to 150,000 year time span.
What I'm saying is that if we expect to see a temperature do this in a 150,000 year time span, in a 100 year time span, seeing it do this, that's very worrying. Now,
you mean like Michael Mann's hockey stick, the one that's under attack right now in court by a major statistician who claimed that he falsified his data. I mean, that spike?
I'm talking about the record temperatures that are declared, that have been declared for like the past 5 years that have also.
So yes.
So increased with the concentration of parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that every model is perfect.
They're not
right
perfect.
now, sure, but right now we're like standing in traffic with our eyes closed saying the car hasn't hit me yet, so I don't think there's any coming. I think it's pretty undeniable at this point that there is an impact on climate across the planet. I
think that's highly deniable.
Yeah,
we have no idea what
exactly. What effects can you point to? This is precisely what JBP is saying. The timeline is very important. You can take a little blip of the last 100 years, 200 years, 250 years, but when we were talking about the climate of a planet that is, 14 billion years old? Or not 13, that's the universe, but you know what I mean.
The impact is from. We don't know where the carbon dioxide is from. We can't measure the warming of the oceans. We have terrible temperature records going back 100 years. Almost all the terrestrial temperature detection sites were first put outside urban areas, and then as
but all the 97% of the climate scientists agree, right?
Right, and then you have to correct. Then you have to correct for the movement of the urban areas, and then you introduce an error parameter that's larger than the purported increase in temperature that you're planning to measure. This isn't data. This is guess. And there's something weird underneath it.
Oh, yeah.
There's something weird that isn't oriented well towards human beings underneath it.
They want to get rid of people.
It has this guise of compassion. Oh, we're going to save the poor in the future. It's like that's what the bloody communists said.
Yep.
And they killed a lot of people doing it.
Bingo.
And we're walking down that same road now with this insistence that, we're so compassionate that we care about the poor 100 years from now. And if we have to wipe out several 100 million of them now, well, that's a small price to pay for the future utopia. And we've heard that sort of thing before.
And let's hear the pushback, because obviously Destiny's going to be like, whoa, no, of course not. Of course not.
And the alternative to that is to stop having global level elites plot out a utopian future or even an anti-dystopian future. And that's exactly what's happening now with organizations like the WEF. And if this wasn't immediately impacting the poor in a devastating manner, I wouldn't care about it that much, but it is.
Based.
You know, I watched over the course of the last 5 years the estimates of the number of people who were in serious danger of food privation rise from about 100 million to about 350 million. That's a major price to pay for a little bit of, what would you say, for progress on the climate front that's so narrow it can't even be measured.
I don't think the increase in hungry people on the planet is because of climate policies.
Why not?
So just gonna sidestep the question entirely. And so I definitely suggest you guys go check out the full podcast. I actually covered the full podcast. I cut it up a little bit and did it in different orders to make it exciting, but check out the entire thing. Check out my coverage or the podcast itself. Either way, it is a good old time.